Who am I? Uh, I joined the Gates Foundation 11 years ago after 24 years at SWIFT, the interbank network, where notably I was the chief architect for the network that still runs today. And also I created the InnoTribe innovation arm of SWIFT. So that's just a little bit of credentials. And indeed, I have some gray hair to talk about the history and future of financial inclusion. So let's get started. So, what do these flip-flops have to do with bank accounts? Well, for 1 billion people, this is how you move money from A to B. You have to walk to hand out cash. You have to walk to pay the utilities. You have to walk to pay for to the school for the tuition of your child. You have to walk and walk and walk all day long. Thank you. Yep. So these are called Hawaii Chapal in India, Chole Wote in Ghana, many other names. Chole Wote means let's go, friend, let's go together. Quite nice. Using Chole Wote to move money from A to B is not only time-consuming, of course, it's tiring, it is expensive. It is expensive to be without a bank account and poor, unfortunately. Okay, so let's see where we are today with financial inclusion, how we got here, and also, I'm sure, the most interesting piece is what's next. So here is where we are. If the slide wants to move. I'm clicking. Here we go. So this comes from the Global Findex database, which is produced by the World Bank, which the Gates Foundation sponsors. These are the numbers over time from 2011 to 2021. And on the top left side, you can see that the huge progress has been made over these 10 years. And we went from a situation of 2.3 billion unbanked people to 1.4 in 2021. We are eagerly awaiting the 2024 numbers, which should land very soon, before the year end. And I fully expect that number to be around 1 billion. So very steady progress over time, notably in Africa. However, 1 billion remain. I'm sure of that 1 billion, 350 million are in Africa. You can see some interesting things on the bottom right that happened over time. Some of the things that drove this progress beyond payment technology, but COVID has driven a lot of financial inclusion simply because governments needed to deliver aid and support for the people, and having payments being connected to a payment system was hugely helpful. But you can see utilities, wages, a lot of use cases have been instrumental in this progress. But challenges remain. You can see the gender gap that was mentioned, that persists between women and men in account ownership and active usage. That is another big barrier to financial inclusion. So, great progress, but challenges remain, and we by far are not done yet. And we'll see. The other thing, if you look at these numbers, also we have a goal that is in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, for that number to be 0 in 2030. You can see if we are just continue like we are, we'll not get there. So we need to accelerate this movement, and I'll show you some ways to do that in the What's Next session. So how do we get there? In Africa, actually Africa led in many ways the digital revolution. And we talked a lot yesterday with the honorable parliamentaries about M-Pesa in Kenya. M-Pesa was the first system that was specifically designed for financial inclusion, provided by a non-bank, and introduced this possibility that you can send money as easily as you send a text message from a very simple mobile phone, not even a smartphone. And we have heard yesterday the success story of M-Pesa. That was the first wave of innovation. Today, this is called mobile money, for those of you who are not from Africa. There are today more than 250 mobile money systems across Africa. So it's not only good for financial inclusion, but it proves the point that money can be made in serving, and including and serving the poorer and remote populations. The next wave of innovation happened in Tanzania, neighboring Tanzania. There, contrary to Kenya, there was not one dominant system. There are many mobile money systems and banks, and Tanzania went to create something that's called TIPS, which is an instant payment platform that interconnects all of these systems together. So that if you have a wallet on one of these mobile money systems, you can send and receive money to any other wallet, irrespective of the provider, which is not the case actually yet fully in Kenya. And you can also send and receive money from any bank account. So that TIPS system is provided by the Central Bank of Tanzania, and it is one example of what we call DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure, that is essentially provided by the government for the public good and also to enable competition between all of these providers. So not only does this have an inclusive effect for people, but also it is healthy to increase competition across the system. That's the second wave of innovation. The third interesting thing that happened is open source. And here I'm really talking to the converted. Many countries, as I mentioned, consider payment systems to be a strategic asset of the country, a digital public infrastructure, and are in the process of developing and implementing such systems. But the problem, of course, is that developing and running a 24/7, 365 instant payment system requires some skills. To help with that, we have created movements of open source systems that can help countries start from a solid base. Here I'm showing the picture. This is from 2018. The COIL and my team at Gates Foundation, we were brainstorming about how to work together and for Mojaloop and Interledger to be fully integrated as a system. This was in San Francisco, if I remember well. You can see Adrian in the front there. And that was really an exciting. So Mojaloop was created. Mojaloop allows essentially any country with little skill to implement with local resources an instant payment system. Interledger was created in parallel and then integrated to provide essentially what we discussed yesterday, the capacity to move money with certainty. And Mojaloop provides the layers on top of name mapping and settlement and so forth. So today, in fact, to come back to Tanzania, Tanzania is using Mojaloop to implement TIPS, and it is live today. There is about 12 countries in Africa that are in the process of developing similar systems, either based on Moja Loop or not, by the way. So that's what happened. And then here we can see this is a map of Africa that is produced by Africa Nenda, one of the key technology assistance providers in Africa, that shows which countries have currently an instant payment system. These are in lighter color blue here. Some of them are what we call bank instant payment systems, or connecting banks only, or some of them are connecting only mobile money systems. Some are fully interoperable, interconnected. And you can see that there is a lot. It's not anymore a question of whether countries should go about developing and providing these systems, but more about how and when. So that's how we got there. So let's get to the what's next session. Well, obviously, scale. Some countries are developing. Not all of these systems are fully inclusive according to all of the criteria. So they need to progress. Of course, we need to work in the countries that are not highlighted to help out. So lots of effort that needs to happen. At the same time, lots of funding needs to be found to help out with these developers, because, as I mentioned, most of these systems will be developed as digital public infrastructures, not necessarily by the private sector, but more by governments. Hence, some money is required to fund that. That's one of the things we do at the Gates Foundation together with many other partners. Also, we talked a lot about cross-border. That's also what's next. Remittances into Africa, but perhaps more importantly, what we call regional trade. You may not know, or you probably know, but the busiest trade border in Africa is between Zambia and the DRC. Huge amount of trade goes there. A lot of that is done in cash, and digitizing that will be one of the next priorities. And here on the right, we see regional deployments that are also being in process. We have talked yesterday about TCIB here in the Southern African Development Community that is operating today. We heard yesterday the status on it and the progress. There is a system called PAPS, Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, that is being piloted as we speak. The GMAC Pay for Central Africa, the CEMAC region is live on a cross-border. COMESA is building, the COMESA Business Council is building a regional cross-border system in the countries highlighted in blue there. The EAC region is also working on cross-border. So it's a huge effort that is really the next wave of innovation as well. And a lot of us are involved in these efforts and supporting, in my team at the Gates Foundation, in supporting many of these also regional systems. Consumer protection and fraud. It's a huge issue. We have heard about it yesterday. And as these systems continue to spread, we need to be very, very conscious, careful, and intentional about securing these systems, because if we, who are educated to a financial system, can be scammed, you can imagine how people who are not can be even worsely scammed. So we need to be very conscious of that. There is a lot of progress, there is a lot of effort on the so-called RegTech, SupTech kind of communities to help out. We talked about regulators with an S yesterday, how they have difficulty managing change, but change is happening. So we need to help them also with digital technology to provide better, faster regulation, better supervision, to provide redress for consumers who are either defrauded or who have made mistakes, because that's very important too. So one of the principles is that, I would argue, is that digital financial service providers should be financially liable for services they provide, not the consumers, especially not the consumers we are including more and more. I want to highlight here, there are several people from the Tazama community. Tazama is another open source system that provides transaction monitoring software that can be hooked directly into an instant payment system, either Mojaloop based or based on other technologies. It is capable of applying rules to detect fraud on a system level and can associate in real time a probability factor to a payment, to each payment, whether that payment may be fraudulent or not. So if you don't know about Tazama, we'll hear more about Tazama, I think, later today, or have heard yesterday. But we have people in the room from the Tazama Linux Foundation organization. This is dear to my heart, the project Yes. So I mentioned there is 1 billion people remaining. These 1 billion are going to be the most difficult to reach and the most difficult to serve because the progress has been made a lot, but that billion that remains is really the remotest, the poorest people. So what does it take for a person in that population to say yes to a payment, to have enough trust in a digital system, to actually understand the digital system and trust the digital system to say, yes, I want to do this payment? I don't want to go into all of this. You'll have the slides, I think. You can look at it. But there is institutional trust, interpersonal trust, there is safety, confidence, ease of use. All of these factors play into a person's capacity to understand and use the system. Now, if you think about it, we are taking as a fact that mobile phones are those who are the mobile phone technology is the one that is best suited for financial inclusion and payments. I would challenge that. With the billion people who are coming, they may not be educated, they may not be able to read, they may not speak English, or they may not. So how do we reach to them? And they are maybe elderly, and we talked yesterday with some people, and I actually observed in many cases how elderly women in villages, when they have to pay, they give the phone to the kid. So the kid, can do it for her. But that's not really secure nor convenient, right? So how do we do that? And this is a research project I want to mention, and I invite ideas. What if that woman heard in her language what is required, so that she doesn't have to sit down and start typing on phones and making mistakes? What if she's told, in her language, you are invited to pay such and such amount for the tuition of your child, and the only thing she does is says, yes, and it's authenticated and so forth. So that's, I think, one of the futures, the technology that will drive, I think, also the inclusion, and also beyond being simply capable of being able to pay, there are many other services that will be available. Of course, microcredits and loans, but pay-as-you-go services, assistance from the government, and so on and so forth. I think some digital assistance will also be needed to guide these people, in all of this. So it's a huge endeavor, initiative, and we need to go fast about it. So any of your ideas about this are welcome on how to do this next generation of technology that is really specifically targeted for the poorest people. And then, Stefan talked about packetization yesterday. How about tokenization? That's also one of the next steps. So here we go, over time. So we have digitized books, we have digitized photos, we have digitized music, we are fully in the process of digitizing money, world wallets, and we talked about stable coins and so forth yesterday. But I think, what about if you can move money when it becomes digital, moving money digitally instantly is moving data. What if you could move tokens representing physical things like a cow in that same way, or a share, security, or a piece of land, or many other things. So this tokenization is, I think, something very important that will go way beyond payments, that will enable people to secure in the digital world their physical assets and move them very easily, sell and trade them. There is we have mentioned, Brianna in her introductory talk mentioned the Finternet idea that was published by Nandan Nilekani and the chair of BIS yesterday. And very interestingly, indeed, there is a paper that describes the Finternet, and that paper mentioned something called Interledger. Very interestingly, as Brianna says, with not a capital I. So that, I think, is a very important effort as well, that is happening, that's really interesting, and that we all, I'm sure, will be involved at some point in time. So let me get to what Brianna said yesterday morning. So this is Gabriela, that Brianna mentioned, one of these 1 billion unbanked. She's our boss. She's telling us what she needs. She needs technology that is mobile, that is fast, instant, affordable, secure, usable, and interesting and simple. That's what she needs, and that's what we are here ultimately with all of this technology to do. Thank you very much, and I think we have 8 minutes for questions. So please, any questions on all of that? Sir.
Thank you very much, and must appreciate the presentation that you've done. I come from Malawi, and so many of our people are yet to be connected. But money transactions are in place. Our huge problem is fraud. Mm-hmm. I have been scammed before. So are some of my colleagues, members of parliament here, to the extent that people are now beginning to chicken out from the digital transactions because they are not well secure. What are you doing? What should be done to make sure that the securities, as are provided for, get down to the very poor of the poorest who could not detect, as you have said, that as educated as we are, we will be schemed. What about that person whose last dollar would have been the one that has been schemed? Because this is the right way to go, but with the threats that are there, then it is eluding the whole benefits of the same. Thank you.
First of all, very sorry to hear you have been scammed, yeah, many of us have. I have been too. So, with my 24 years of and plus financial technology. So yes, it is. As I mentioned, this is a huge issue. There are lots of things that need to happen at many levels. First, there is the need to design these systems in a way that prevents as much fraud as possible. All fraud will never be fully prevented. You can design systems to minimize frauds, then you need to have systems that when fraud is detected to repair. Designing this system to be fraud-proof have many angles. I have been personally involved in the United Nations DPI Safeguards Initiative that recently published a number of recommendations for people involved in designing, architecting, developing, and operating DPI in general, payment systems in particular, about how to prevent fraud. The open source software that I mentioned, Mojaloop, Tazama, Interledger, all have as well fraud-proof protections, like Interledger has world-class crypto. Mojaloop has a flow that one of the biggest scams in instant payment system is when someone is induced to send money to a wrong phone number, right? So you can prevent that by showing to the person the name of the phone corresponding to the phone number or the alias before they say yes or before they push the button. So you can prevent fraud in that way. But all fraud will never be fully prevented. Hence, you also need to have regulatory, supervisory systems that are necessary to, when fraud is detected, to act and correct it in some way. And I mentioned the recourse system, where someone can go and complain, and someone will actually be able to listen and act, at least to try to help. So there are many, many aspects, and what I mean to say is that fraud needs to be pervasive in everything that is being done in rolling out digital systems. So, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, which was very interesting. I like the YES project. And
Thank you.
I'd like a little expounding on how you're going to achieve the localization. If you're talking about language,
yeah.
In my country, you're talking about over 53 languages that we speak. Yeah. In Zambia, I think it is 73. And if you keep going, so I'd like to know how you hope to work on that localization of language.
Thank you for the question. So the way this is done, and there are many projects. I can tell you about a few initiatives that we at the Gates Foundation are involved with. But basically, it has to do with collecting voice samples in each language. So we worked in several countries, India and others. I can't remember which in Africa from the top of my head. You have to collect voice samples as much as we can in order to be able to generate to understand the language and to generate verbal, articulations of written text. So that's the way it is done. Artificial intelligence is a key component nowadays, as you know, with ChatGPT. So there is a lot of effort on that front. But essentially, at the end of the day, it has to do with collecting data, voice samples for the language. And that's a huge work, but it needs to be done. So. Any other question, please?
A quick question. You mentioned about the financial companies being responsible or liable for the fraud. So are you thinking of insurance requirement for the financials? What's
No,
your thought there?
it's more of what I propose to be a principle. So essentially, that it shouldn't be the burden on a poor person's shoulders to try to prove to someone what they did and why they were scammed or they did something wrong. It should be the responsibility of the provider. How they do that is up to them. They can go many ways about it, including insurance and so forth. But the principle I propose to stand is that the poor person not be liable, financially liable. They have enough issues already to be indeed even more liable for using a digital system. Thank you. Hope that answers. We have time for one more, I think. Please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, or good morning. Thank you for your presentation. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
We work extensively, or I work extensively in East Africa, amongst other places, and we do a lot of these things, and yet I've never encountered Interledger or Mojaloop or Rafiki or any of these things. It feels to me that there's a massive disconnect between the thinking that's happening here in these ivory towers and what's actually happening on the ground. How do you feel about that?
So thank you for the observation. It is true to a certain extent, but let me just say that...
I mean, I note that I am here,
yeah.
so that's in a way.
It is true that to hear about these systems, you need to be more involved than, I would say, usual with technology. And that is a challenge we all have. I keep mentioning to Brianna, and I was yesterday in a bus with, I think, the company supporting Interledger on the social media, like how do we reach these great ideas and these great technologies? How do we make them known more broadly? That's why I'm, for example, so glad to have the honorable parliamentaries here to hear, because technology is important, but it is not enough known. But my challenge to you and a call to action is make it known, please, now that you know. Yeah. One more?
Thank you so much. I've been waiting to kind of like ask the question. So my name is Blessing, and I'm currently working on AI projects and blockchain projects. So I'm exploring the intersection of those technologies. So I wanted to know, firstly, is AI the right way to go for onboarding the next 1 billion? Because we do have these wonderful technologies, but if there's no people using it, if there isn't adoption, it becomes a problem. And the second question is open source the right way?
Okay.
Because
I like that question.
Those who are frauding, they can have access to the code and explore vulnerabilities. Yeah. So I just wanted to know, based on this too.
Thank you. Both very interesting questions and observations. Is AI the right choice? I don't know, to be honest. This is I mentioned Project Yes, is at the moment more of a research initiative, which we carry to find out if it's helpful. But I suspect that it will be, because that 1 billion people that remains will be much harder, because, as I mentioned, they are more rural and perhaps less, even aware of that. So I suspect it will be, but whether it will is really open, and the chapter is open to be, the book is open to be written. On open source, I'm glad of the question. This is one of these debates that is a little bit almost like religious in a way, where you can argue both sides pretty much to any extent. My belief system is that, and being a technologist from many, many years, I compare it like if you buy, a can of tomato paste or something, you're going to watch what's inside, right? To find out if it's correct for you and it's good for you to eat, and to find out about the product you're about to eat. Well, open source is the same. Open source, you can actually look You can sit down, download the code, look at it. And in my mind, it's the best proof that you have that what it is that you are actually consuming, in a way, producing. And so I think that's how I see open source. Other people argue that because the code is available to everyone, hackers will understand the vulnerabilities of the system. Yes, that is true as well. But the open source community is, always moving to correct this as it goes. So ultimately, do you trust your technologists who can read the code, or do you trust a commercial provider? Ultimately, that's your decision. That's not, everyone is right. There is no wrong. And we have observed in Africa countries that go with commercial providers, and we have observed countries that go with open source, and none of that is right or wrong. This is the choice of the country they made very consciously. So that's I hope that gets at your question. I think we're done. Thank you very much.